Hello, welcome back to Uncanny Oddities. Tonight we are going to be talking about sea exploration. So, a long time ago, we had galleons and, well, even before galleons, we had little sailboats and stuff like that. Then we moved on to galleons and bigger ships, and eventually we got steam power where they shovel the coal into the ship, and now we've got electric and everything else. We have gone very far in our terms of sea exploration. But what I'm curious about that I would like to try and focus on with this episode tonight is why did we ever go to space? I mean, I get it, space. We wanted to explore that too, and, thought it was interesting. But why did we go to space when there's still so much left to explore in the oceans? It's like when you're doing a puzzle. Do you just, well, I guess you kind of do jump all over the place. That's probably a bad example. But I'm sure you get what I'm trying to say. Like, why would we leave this planet and go into outer space when there's still so much more to explore on this planet? And another thing that I've always thought was very interesting was like we go to this planet and we go into outer space. We're able to find a way to break through our atmosphere and leave the planet. We got all this crazy technology, all this fancy stuff, but you mean to tell me that we cannot figure out how to go deeper into the ocean and survive that water pressure? Because if we can survive the pressure of breaking through our atmosphere to get into outer space, then I find it very difficult to believe that we can't find a way or some sort of technology to survive deep down in our oceans. And I wonder if maybe the stuff in our oceans would lead to revealing secrets about ancient civilizations. And maybe that's why we don't want to explore the oceans. Maybe exploring the oceans would teach people too much about things that they don't want us to know about. Maybe the oceans contain secrets leading to our past technology and a bunch of the stuff that they were using back during the times of ancient Egypt and Atlantis and stuff like that. Maybe that's why they don't want us to explore the oceans any more than we do, is because they're afraid of what they might find. There could even be a kraken down there. I mean, we got giant squid. Those are real. So the kraken might just be based on a giant squid, of course. Who knows? But even if it was, the kraken was likely like the king of the giant squid. And there were so many stories about the kraken that I believe has got to be out there somewhere. And some people may not believe that anything could exist, that deep down in the ocean because of the pressure of all that water pressing down on it, and that's why they say, supposedly that's why they claim that we can't travel that far down in the ocean. And the stuff that they have put out there, like that vessel that they were controlling with the, what was it, a video game controller, they did, like, remote piloted one, and it got crushed by the water pressure. That was a bit much, but I see why they did that. But my thing is, that was just a private, rich person with some money and a curiosity in them. So my question is, what could we do if we actually invested real, like, government money into something like this and actually tried to explore? Because there's got to be something wild down there in the oceans. Because if you've ever played video games, I don't know about you, but when I play games, I find the oceans way more interesting than the skies. Because, the skies, outer space, whatever, yeah, you could, like, outer space is just a whole bunch of nothing. Like, there's stars, there's other planets, asteroids. I get all that. But, like, the ocean is so interesting to me because it feels like it reveals a lot more of our past. because it's preserved. And like the Titanic, you can still go and, I don't know exactly where it is or if it's even still there, but they may have cleaned it up. But I think I've heard that you can actually still go on a like Titanic cruise ships, obviously, but I've heard that there's actually a place where you can go and explore the actual Titanic, like the wreckage and the remains. I don't know if it's legal, but I've heard it's out there somewhere. Like you can, try to go explore it because they found some really strange stuff on there. And they said it gives people a very strange feeling because it's such a liminal space. Because it was supposed to be like a cruise ship, you're supposed to go on your cruise and then come back home. But now they got all this stuff on there, like, ancient passengers and stuff like that, that's just there forever. Now, another thing that I find interesting about the ocean is all the stories of ghost ships. A lot of times they talk about stories of ghost ships, like, finding a ship in the fog and, during bad weather and stuff, like we mentioned with the Flying Dutchman, recently. So, what I was wondering is there was an episode of a TV show called Supernatural, my favorite, of course, and they had an interesting take on their ship. Now, I don't think they ever gave their ghost ship a name in this episode, or if they did give it a name, I don't remember which one it was. But I think it was just a basic generic ghost ship. Okay. So what they did is they actually said that the ghost ship would curse people. Okay, they said that whenever someone looked at the ship, it would curse you, and eventually it would kill you. Like you would die a very painful death from the ship. So what they did is in the episode is they saw the ghost ship, so obviously they had to take care of it. And with it being a ghost ship, obviously they were cursed by a ghost. So what happened is they had to, get the remains of the ghost and burn it because that's how you get rid of a ghost. You got to burn the remains. So, anyways, after they did all that, they were able to, protect themselves. But it was very interesting because what would happen is people would see this ghost ship and they would die. But here's the thing, they weren't sailors. They didn't see this ghost ship out on the ocean. Here's the plot twist. They were seeing this ghost ship from land. Like a guy was jogging down the pier one day and when he saw the ghost ship and but here's the thing, they drown on dry land. They literally choke to death and drown on dry land. And that was the thing that was very interesting, was they would see this ghost ship and it cursed them even on dry land. Like they weren't sailors, they weren't going out and exploring the oceans or anything like that. They were on dry land like you or me right now. And that was one thing that really stood out about this one is, most ghost ship stories, they talk about going out to the ocean, the weather gets really bad, and then you see a ship out in the distance, out in the fog or whatever. And then next thing you know, you're in a really bad storm, and it usually doesn't end well for you. But another thing, like we were talking about the other day with the Flying Dutchman, is, a lot of these stories about ghost ships are, they talk about things like, you see the ship and no one lives to tell the tale. But if no one lives to tell the tale, then how does the tale get told? And that is one reason why some ghost ships can be a little confusing and like, why are we believing in this? How is this even a story? If everyone who's ever seen a ghost ship dies, then how do they get around to tell us the story of their experience? So some of it can be a little silly, but it's still interesting to think about, I think. And that's where the pirates come in because, a lot of violence can happen out on the oceans, especially when pirates get involved. I love pirates, but, I'm not going to deny what they are. But, it's interesting because when people die out on the ocean, a lot of times their bodies will just, fall into the ocean and sink to the bottom. So there are probably a lot of ghosts out on the ocean. if you believe in ghosts and spirits and that kind of thing, then I think there would likely be a lot of haunted waters out there. Let's put it that way. And as a result, that might be where the ghost ships come in. I do think ghost ships might be real. It's just the thing that confuses me is that they kind of it's kind of awkward because the ghost ships, like I said, they tell no tales. Like, how does someone tell the tale if they're all, dying when they see the ghost ship? That's the thing that stands out to me. But pirates are interesting to me. And, back in the day when they were on the wooden ships and, the galleons and all that, they didn't have much in the form of entertainment. So they would have to come up with their own forms of entertainment. And one way they did was through sea shanties. And they would come up with their songs and stuff to sing on the ship and stuff like that. And, there was all sorts of different things. So what I'm wondering is maybe the stories about ghost ships were kind of like what we would do when we were younger, and we would sit around and tell ghost stories at at campfires and during sleepovers and stuff like that. And I wonder if maybe that's kind of where the ghost ships kind of originated, is kind of like campfire stories for sailors and, people out on the ocean and stuff like that. Is maybe the ghost ships were never real to begin with, and maybe the stories got passed around to a point where people actually started to believe the stories, not because they didn't know any better, but because they didn't know that their friends were, just trying to tell an entertaining story. And then, the people who truly believed it and didn't realize that it was just an entertaining story, maybe they went around and they started telling other people, and then that's kind of how it spread, like word of mouth, like we said the other day, a game of telephone. So maybe that's how all this stuff spread, is just by people passing the story around. And as they told more people believed it, and they told more people who also believed it, and there you go. That's how it happened. But, there's a lot of stuff going on out in the oceans. We got submarines, we got boats, and all this other stuff. Like, and just what you see on the surface is not everything there is either. Like, like I said, submarines and stuff like that. Who knows what's going on under the ocean that we don't even see? And jellyfish and squids and sharks and all these other things, especially s- jellyfish and squids, they have a very different bone structure, so they might actually be able to survive some of the deeper parts of the ocean. So I'd be very curious to explore some of the deeper parts of the ocean. But as we said earlier, the problem is apparently the pressure, as the weight of the water gets heavier as you go deeper into the ocean, of course. And a lot of the stuff that we've sent down eventually gets crushed by the weight of the water. But is the weight of the water really any worse than the weight of the entire atmosphere? That's what I cannot wrap my own brain around. That's what I can't understand on my own personal level, is how can we develop technology to literally break through our atmosphere and leave this planet, but we can't develop technology to suppress the weight of the ocean? That's just very interesting to me. And that's what I'm going to leave you with tonight. So thank you for coming to hang out, and I hope to see you next time. So I will see you next time, and as always, stay uncanny.